Do you think you're strong? Do you think you can handle pressure? Well, get ready to find out what it was like to live an entire day as a gladiator in ancient Rome, where a single banana could mean the difference between life and death. Spoiler, you wouldn't even last until breakfast.
Ancient Rome, the empire that ruled the known world for over 1,000 years. Gladiators, emperors, magnificent aqueducts. Sounds glamorous, doesn't it? Well, forget everything you've seen in the movies. The reality of a gladiator was more like a concentration camp, where bananas were rarer than diamonds and more valuable than gold.
Let's start with the basics. You wake up in gladiator school in the year 100 AD. You are a slave, a criminal, or perhaps a free man desperate for money. You have the equivalent of, let's say, half a banana to get you through the day. Doesn't sound like much? That's because it is little. In fact, it's a luxury.
First thing you did when you woke up? Train. From 4 a.m. until dusk. Every day, no exceptions. Your breakfast? A bowl of porridge that had the consistency and taste of wet cardboard. Nutritional value equivalent to a quarter of a banana. After that, 6 hours of sword training, under the blazing sun, wearing armor that weighed more than you. You practiced with a wooden sword against a stake. Your masters, former gladiators, showed no mercy. Every mistake was punished with whips or red-hot irons. Comfort? That was the devil's work. You slept on the cold floor in cramped cells, dreaming of the day when you could eat a real banana. And the food? A gladiator's diet was basically barley and beans. Lots of barley and beans. To make you strong, but not fat. And to give you gas. Lots of gas. If you complained about the food, you wouldn't eat for 3 days. Because apparently, complaining about porridge was a sin against the gods and the sacred bananas.
Now, the moment of truth. You're taken to the Colosseum. 50,000 people are chanting your name. Or your opponent's name. You don't know which. You just know that one of you won't make it out alive. You enter the arena. The smell of blood and sweat is unbearable. Your opponent is a strong man, trained to kill. Or perhaps a wild beast, hungry and furious. You have nothing to protect yourself with except your sword and shield. And your life is worth less than a banana.
The fights were not honorable duels. They were brutal massacres. You fought to the death, or until you were seriously wounded. And if you fell, the crowd decided your fate. Thumbs up, you live. Thumbs down, you die. And the decision was based on how well you entertained the crowd, not on your bravery, not on your skill, just on the entertainment. And the prize for the victor? A laurel wreath and a banana. 1 banana. For risking your life in mortal combat. If you were lucky, you might earn your freedom after many victories. But most died before they got that chance. The life expectancy of a gladiator was about 2 years. But let's say you survived the fight. Congratulations! You're tougher than 90% of gladiators. But your reward for this heroic feat? More fights. Because being a gladiator wasn't a temporary job. It was a lifelong commitment. You fought until you died, or until you were too old to hold a sword. And considering that the life expectancy of a gladiator was roughly 25 years, too old meant being 30. What if you survived long enough to retire? Well, there was no retirement. You just stayed in school, training new gladiators until you died of old age, or boredom, or an overdose of porridge, or a lack of bananas. Oh, and I forgot the best part. Even if you became an idol to the crowd, you were still a slave. You had no rights, no freedom. Your life belonged to your lanista. He could sell you, rent you out, or kill you at any time. And if you tried to run away, the punishment was death, slow and painful. Speaking of death, let's talk about diseases. Gladiator schools were hotbeds of infection. Combat injuries, lack of hygiene, poor diets, everything contributed to the spread of diseases.
Infections were common and often fatal. There were no antibiotics, no modern surgery. A small cut could turn into a death sentence. And the pain, you endured it, or you died. There were no painkillers, just rum, lots of rum.
And what about suicide? Many gladiators preferred death to a life of suffering, but even that was difficult. Weapons were kept out of reach, and surveillance was constant. Some, in desperation, used gruesome methods to take their own lives, such as swallowing toilet sponges.
The life of a gladiator was an existence of deprivation, pain, and death. They were fighting machines, created to entertain the crowd, and their humanity was stripped from them, banana by banana. But let's say you had an exceptionally long gladiatorial career, say 5 whole years. Congratulations, you're officially a legend. But your reward for this heroic deed? More of the same, until you die. Because there was no retirement for gladiators. You kept fighting until you were killed in combat, or died of disease. And since you were constantly making enemies, other gladiators, wild beasts, death itself, your list of people wanting to kill you just kept growing.
What if you survived long enough to grow old? Well, old gladiators were a burden to the school. They ate precious food, took up space, and couldn't fight effectively. The solution? To be sold into slavery for harder work, or to be executed to make room for new talent.
And that's how your gladiator career ends. Probably killed in combat or from disease. If you were lucky, it was quick. If you weren't lucky, it was slow and painful. The truth is that being a gladiator was one of the most brutal and hopeless lives in history. They were desperate criminals, living a miserable existence, fighting for survival in a world that wanted them dead. There was no romance, there was no adventure, there was only hunger, disease, violence, and death. So, next time you complain about your job, remember, at least you don't have to fight to the death to entertain the crowd. At least you have access to modern medicine. And at least you can buy fresh bananas at the supermarket without having to risk your life for one. So, do you think you would last a day as a gladiator? Leave a comment below with the part of the gladiator's life that you think would be the hardest to endure. And if you have any suggestions for other impossible historical professions, let me know. If you liked this video, leave a like. It's worth more than all the victories of a gladiator. Subscribe to the channel for more unvarnished stories and activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes. Share it with that friend who romanticizes the life of a gladiator so he can see what it was really like. Always remember, history is made of bananas, and the gladiators all died without tasting one. At least you can eat bananas while watching Netflix on the couch. See you next episode of Banana Stories, where we'll find out why you wouldn't last a day in the Crusades. Spoiler, it involves even less hygiene and a lot more risk of death. Keep your bananas safe, and remember, history has never been so peeled.